entered Jerusalem and gone to the temple to turn the tables on the money changers, he appeared frequently in the temple teaching in the days leading up to his final Passover. He often taught in parables using everyday images that drove his point home. Landlords were as common in Jesus' time as they are today. Often people buy property or like vineyards or olive groves, and they would lease them out to tenants. And as some of you know, some tenants are good and some can be a nightmare. In this parable, the landlord leases out a vineyard and then goes off traveling. According to Levitical law, the owner could not profit on a leased property for 5 years in order for the tenant to get sort of a foot up on the debt and get a good financial foothold. So this landlord didn't seek to collect his share of the profit at least until the 6th year. At that time, he sent a servant to collect. In fact, he sent 3 servants to collect. The first was beaten and sent away. The second was beaten and humiliated and sent away. The third was wounded, probably with a blade or with stones. So the owner decided to send his own son, because surely they would respect his son. Jesus was no longer cloaking his accusations against the leaders of the Jewish faith. This parable was meant to condemn the leaders and to create an even greater divide between them and the people. God, the owner of all things, lent out Israel to her religious leaders. But instead of honoring God with their leadership, they chose to rob the faith for their own gain. The corruption, while not including all of the leaders, was rampant. God sent prophets who were rejected, beaten, and wounded because of the message they brought to these tenant leaders. The tenant leaders broke their trust with God, but surely they would respect God's own Son when he showed up. But of course, they did not. Jesus asked the crowd, what should the consequences be? And as usual, without waiting for an answer, Jesus proclaims that the tenant leaders should die because of their evil. The owner God has been so generous. The tenants did not clear the land and plant the vineyard. It was leased to them, ready to produce. God was generous in sending servants to straighten out the path of the crooked. Jesus was generous in giving many opportunities for doing the right thing. God was generous in sending the Son as the very last plea. But greed and self-absorption make it almost difficult to choose what is right. This isn't just about the physical. This is also about the emotional and about the spiritual. Greed and self-absorption are so tantalizing to us that they sometimes come upon us when we're not paying attention. This parable asks us, Then one of the last stories in the Gospel of Luke before Jesus' final hours is much more subtle. It's a parable than the parable of the wicked tenants. Jesus began to teach the folks gathered around him in the temple, and no one had a clue how his words would end up. Offering time in the temple was ongoing, not a matter of passing the plate. It was not uncommon for people to hang around to see who gave what, or to make sure others saw what they gave. The treasury was located in the court of women. There were 13 receptacles or shofar chests, alluding to the trumpet-like shape. Each chest was labeled for a different type of offering. Now, offering during the time of Passover was rather complicated as far as what people were expected to give, because taxes were added on to the offering. Offerings were taxed, which negatively impacted the poor more than the rich. And we understand this in our own country, in the discrepancy between the percentage of how people who are poor and people who are rich are taxed, in the loopholes that are available to wealthy people, and the resources that people who are poor do not have. Jesus doesn't mention the exact amount that the rich people were putting into the treasury, but he was very specific about the poor widow's offering. 2 small copper coins. These were lepta. It would have taken 128 lepta to make a denarius, or a day's wage. So in the grand scheme of things, this offering was negligible. Then Jesus makes the most ridiculous claim, a laughable claim, an outrageous claim. He says, "Truly I tell you, the widow has given more to the treasury than did the rich." What? The listeners were thinking? Then Jesus explained. The widow gave everything, but the wealthy gave some. She gave out of poverty, but the rich gave out of abundance. The rich put in gifts, but the widow put in all that she had to live on. Jesus' comment on the heart of sacrificial giving can either be read as a lament for those who had a lot, or a praise for the one who had almost nothing. These 4 verses call us to the self-examination of all of our acts of devotion. In acts of faith, why do we do what we do? What's in our heart? And are we comfortable with God see that? God sees not just the outward evidence of our devotion, but the inward motivation. God sees even when others don't. I sat at the bedside of many dying saints, believers, doers, participants in transforming the world for the sake of Jesus Christ. And never have I heard a person say that they probably did too much in the name of Jesus. Never have I heard a person say that they really wish they had done less. Almost unanimously, they have indicated that they would have done more with their time and with their resources and that they would have worked even harder to love and to bless.